infinity, reference without complete description. Here's the outline. First, I'll talk about knowability and present my response to any temporarily first cause argument. And then I'll talk about conceivability, especially in relation to referring to infinity without complete knowledge or even any reference to anything. How much do we have to know in order to refer to those objects, especially in the discussion between direct referentiality and reference mediated by description. From there, I'll motivate a epistemology that's that studies the world with a certain objectivity that's independent of our construction. And I'll end with reality, being, the Heideggerian Sein-Frage. So here it is, what I think is a problem with any first cause argument. So here's an Aristotelian theism, how from first cause to and the unmoved mover, and where the Christian or the Judeo-Christian God fits in. So any event has a cause. Well, then, given any event, it has a cause. Then it seems there's an infinite regress, and that's bad. Then if there's a self-causing first cause, yeah, it is. It also has a cause, but it is self-caused. Then the regress, it wouldn't have been an infinite regress. It ended somewhere. So that's an Aristotelian tradition of thinking about the unmoved mover, and of course the cosmological argument presented by the theologians, philosophers in the Abrahamic tradition. Well, because God, Yahweh, has personhood, or is a person, and it makes decision. And it makes decision out of its own free will. So it's the unmoved mover, and that's how the ancient Greek tradition fits with the Christian, or even going back to the Jewish tradition. But I think the problem is the human arrogance behind is, of course, going back to the ancient Greeks, the Socratic obligation. So he would ask, so what is justice? And he asked someone to further describe justice, and he would give something like a counterexample, and we try our best to describe completely certain things, certain phenomenon, certain object of interest of study, and whatever that's incomprehensible, that we can't completely describe, that indicates an incoherence. So maybe whatever we are thinking about, whatever we're studying, simply because we can't clarify it, that there's some problem to the extent that we have to give up certain thing. And of course, if we were to think about a cause and effect, and how an infinite regress would have constituted the incomprehensibility of the world, if that's a bad thing, then of course that then motivates the conclusion that the first cause argument wants. But then if we permit a mysticism that's based on human finitude, that first we are not infinite, whether in terms of our mind, in terms of our life, we are finite beings, and at best there are things that we could have only understood partially. We don't always have a full understanding of everything. There are things that having a partial understanding is better than no understanding at all. So if we permit this kind of epistemology, methodology, or philosophy that doesn't boast human intelligence, our intellect also have a limit, then the first cause argument, I think, would have lost its teeth. So, and on that note about how we could have understood something without full understanding, in analytic philosophy tradition, there's the semantic externalism and the epistemological externalism that relates to what I want to say here, that we could have thought of something without much or even very minimum true description or knowledge about those things. So externalist, semantics, intentional state, thought, a mind with a certain thought, the mind is in a certain mental state. In a certain state, that mental state is intentional because it is about something. So that representational relation between the mind and the object that the mind is, the thought is about, that intentionality is one thing, but because, the mind is constituted by the brain, and the brain is constituted by going all the way back to something physical. So in the end, of intentional states are also physically constituted. Intentional systems, of course, it interacts with the world in a certain way that a non-intentional system would not have, but that's another issue. A physical system that constitute, some intentional system constituted physically relating to the environment in a certain way, the ecological embedment makes a difference to the semantic of a thought. For example, the twin Earth thought experiment that Hilary Putnam puts forward, you could have, roughly put internally, physically identical brains that relates to the world differently, and that difference would have made a difference to the semantic of the thought, thus constituted by the neurological state. So if semantics, if there's a rule of thought, with regard to narrow content, of course, given how our how we are psychologically and how we think, if we only think about the movement of the mind, regardless of its worldly reference, then of course there are that aspect of the mind and its intentionality. But since reference are worldly, so rule of thought is to be understood in terms of the thought's worldly reference, and that's the whole externalist semantics project is about. And so here's what I want to say about infinity. A point, if we aggregate points, we would end up with a length. But if point is anything with a minimum length, that's not divisible. But of course, any length is divisible. And infinity would be such that even if any length is divisible, however much we would be dividing a certain length, we would never get to a point. Although intuitively, we should be able to do that, but my proposal is that it doesn't, and I'll illustrate that with another example. So parallel lines for Euclid, he thinks that parallel lines meet at infinity, but then they meet somewhere. I think it misses the point of parallel lines. They don't meet at all, either way, right? Whether to go forward or backward, it's the whole point about parallel lines that they don't meet, however far we go. So that's my understanding of infinity in contrast to the ancient Greek, to illustrate how how I think about infinity. And on that note, I think that the real infinity, instead of what's under the name of countable infinity, I don't think infinity is countable, because infinity, the whole point of infinity is that you would never get there. However long you add a certain thing, you just won't get there. That's what infinity is. It's not exhaustible. It's in virtue of a human arrogance that we thought that we will reach there. And even if we thought that we will reach there, because in order for us to think about it, we need to be able to describe it. But no, it's not. It's not a necessity that we do that in order to refer to infinity. So that opens up a that's where the objectivity comes in, because construction independence, to understand an objectivity with construction independence and the corresponding epistemology that some people would see as an idealism, and an idealist understanding of any anti-realism. I illustrate with the following example. So some intuitionist mathematics, they accept only constructive proof, and especially they don't allow, but you can't write in a line arbitrarily that for any P or not P. So that's what they prohibit, but that's what intuitionism prohibit, because that's the following is what they don't permit, which is a proof, especially a reductio ad absurdum, using double negation, because if you suppose not P and you derived a contradiction, it doesn't it doesn't immediately follow that P, because it could be neither, or in any case, in order for a proof, the conclusion of a proof to be accepted, it has to be a constructive proof. That's one thing about intuitionism as an anti-realism, in contrast to realism that permits writing on a line of proof for any P or not P. But then there's a question of not P, the difference between meaninglessness and well, it's not a case that is true, or it simply isn't meaningful. It doesn't express any proposition, but that's another issue. And the realist mathematics has adherence to a Platonic metaphysics in terms of form, the Platonic forms that the form participates in the perceptible world with imperfection, without perfection, while number being something that has that to think platonically about number, it is a measure of the dimension numerosity. So the set of ray, it's B, that's the numerosity, dimension is 1. But if you were to measure the set with regard to the dimension of black person, then it's 0. So yeah, okay. So, and 1 would be the ratio of maximum to perfection, because well, perfection, infinity, and to max out something that's approaching and even reaching, if it's a possibility, perfection, infinity, then the maximum over perfection, that's 1. And to think in terms of logical omniscience, when we maximized the logical inferences given the premises, we made all inferences, then that's one way we achieved logical omniscience. And that's one way to think about infinity as form, how infinity participate in the world. Well, as against which we measure certain thing. Well, we measure against perfection and infinity. Maximum, if we reach infinity, that's when the ratio is 1. So that's that. And lastly, about having talked about objectivity, about the world being independent of our construction. And now here's the question of, so the world, how is it that it's real, given what we said before? Because infinity outruns our construction, but it's real. So the world, conceptualized under Heideggerian sign Frage. So thinghood, if is simply constituted by being part of the world, being part of the world is constitutive of being. For something to have thinghood is for it to be part of the world, and that constitutes its being. But then, of course, there's a question of, so even if it's part of the world, then why is the world real? What about the being of the world? If we think about it in the same way, the thinghood of the world would have been the world being part of itself. And to think in terms of part-whole relation in a set theoretical way, which would be a set which belongs to itself, that's when something is part of itself. But there are many, we can characterize many sets, various different sets that also belong to itself. Then why is the world a self-constituting object that's real? Where's the reality? How is it real? So at least here we can see that something specific about the world is its self-constitution, given thinghood being constituted by being a part of the world. So here it is a theistic ontology. Russell paradox, a set which belongs not to itself. We, given that contradictions are derived from it, so we can conclude that it's not something real, because real objects, complete description would not have a logically entailed contradiction. At least we've talked about set that belongs to itself. Now, set which belongs not to itself, it's surely fictitious without being. It's it has no reality. But we conceive a certain thing, the perfect being, the ontological argument, I guess going back to St. Anselm, we can still question, so the perfect being, okay, let's say perfect knowledge, perfect power, perfect love, but what about its reality, right? The only thing that I could add here is that, well, given the world's reality, and for example, what the book of Genesis says, that God created the world, if not for God's reality, then the world would not have reality, because it would only have been nothingness. So how the world has reality? Because of God's reality. And that's my theistic ontology. So I started with a response to the first cause argument, and then I pointed out how we could have referred to a certain thing without complete description. And without complete description, there are things that outrun our mind, especially our knowing mind, our knowledge. So there's that objectivity, especially in terms of outrunning us, the externalist semantics with an externalist epistemology. And with that, I ask the question of the being, the reality of the world, in relation to the reality of God. Thank you very much.